Chapter 9 of Fact Stranger Than Fiction by John Patterson Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Second term in the General Assembly. Study of Labor Day. At the primaries in the fall of 1889, I was again nominated for the General Assembly, and my majority exceeded by 642 votes that of all others on the Republican ticket, being to that number in excess of the vote cast for Honorable Orlando J. Hodge, ex-Speaker of the lower branch of the 65th General Assembly, and since there were 11 candidates on that ticket, my signal success was taken as a substantial vindication of my previous record. At the general election, I was duly elected by a majority of about 3,000 votes, and in due time took my seat in the 69th General Assembly. I shall mention only a few of the measures which received my special attention during the sessions of this assembly, lest I weary the patience of the reader. The first was a bill to modify the school law of Ohio, introduced by Mr. McDermott of Muskingum County, which provided in substance that whenever 25 parents of colored pupils in the schools of any district petitioned for a separate school for their children, it should be granted to them. I fought this measure desperately every time it came before the House, for the reason that such an amendment of the law would have been only an entering wedge for the system of separate schools, which, in my opinion, would be calamitous to the colored children of Ohio. The bill was finally defeated, and our schools are still intact. The second was the attempt on the part of the Ohio State University, under the leadership of the late ex-president Rutherford B. Hayes, to hog the agricultural scrip which was given to Ohio and other states to promote higher education. This movement was ably and persistently opposed by the late Professor Mitchell, president of Wilberforce University, for which institution he desired to secure a minor portion of that fund. Conferences were held on the floors of both houses, and on one occasion one of the chambers was given up for a general discussion of the matter in the presence of many members of both branches of the General Assembly. The entire amount was ultimately given to the Ohio State University, although in urging the claims and necessities of Wilberforce University, President Mitchell demonstrated his wisdom, courage, and industry to a marked degree, and evoked even from his opponents many encomiums. Had a less able and influential man than ex-President Hayes been opposed to President Mitchell, he probably would have won his point. On the day following the discomfiture of President Mitchell, I spoke before the House in open session for an increase in the tentative appropriation for the State Normal and Industrial Department of Wilberforce, and my interest and energy was such that my argument covered a space of 5 hours, and the proposed appropriation, which was $6,000, then printed in the appropriation bill, was changed to $16,000, and the bill, as passed, carried that amount. This was the first large appropriation which was given to the normal and industrial, and the school was so stimulated and enthused by reason of it that a steady growth set in, which has culminated in the large, handsome, and useful plant which is at Wilberforce today. As a token of regard for the interest displayed by me for the school, as well as for the speech which I delivered on the floor of the House in behalf of the increased appropriation, the faculty of the university bestowed on me the degree of Doctor of Laws, the diploma being signed by every member. The third bill was drawn and introduced by myself, entitled, as I now recall it, "A Bill to Create Labor Day in the State of Ohio." The law was enacted April 28, 1890, and from that date the first Monday in September has been a legal holiday in Ohio. There were marchings and counter-marchings in various states before the enactment of that law, but closely following the legalizing of the day in Ohio, Congress took up the matter and made it national in its scope as it remains to this day. If there was any legislation concerning labor's holiday before I drew and secured the passage of that bill, I have yet to be informed of the fact, but as to Ohio, I am positive there was not. On the first Monday in September following the creation of the day, I was the guest of the Amalgamated Trades of Cincinnati, Ohio. I was received at the depot by a committee of the Trades Union and escorted to headquarters, and when the great procession moved, I was in a carriage at the head of the procession with some of the leading officials of the organization. In the evening of the same day, a banquet was given upon one of the high hills which looked down on a portion of the city, and I was feted as I'd never been before, nor have I been since. Champagne and other wines and beer flowed freely, as I was hailed by those honest workmen, the daddy of the day. The Cincinnati Enquirer and other papers gave full reports of the proceedings, nor did I hear or read them that the day had been legalized before my bill was enacted. On the following Labor Day, 1891, I was again the invited guest of the same organization, and arriving in the early morning, I was escorted to the Gibson House, a hostelry which in those days was regarded as amongst the first of that city. At the breakfast table I was received and served as a gentleman, but when I presented my hat to the usher at the dining-room door at the dinner hour, he informed me that he had orders not to receive it, for the reason that I was a colored man. At the office I was insulted by an offer made to me that they would serve me in the ordinary, a place reserved for the use of servants and children. This offer I promptly refused, and immediately accepted the offer of a reporter of one of the daily papers to escort me to another hotel. Arriving at the Burnett House, a larger and better appointed place than the Gibson House, I was received as a gentleman, assigned to a front room with a bath-room attachment, and served in the dining-room in all respects as any other American citizen. During the course of the day I was honored by ex-Governor Joseph B. Foraker, who paid me a formal call, and also by ex-Congressman McKinley, afterwards Governor of Ohio and President of the United States, who refused to be a guest of the Gibson House after he was informed of my treatment there by the management. On a third occasion we went to a suburban resort and celebrated the day, picnicking. Governor Campbell, then Governor of Ohio, headed the list of speakers, but he sent his secretary, Claude Meeker, in his stead. McKinley did not wish to precede Meeker. Thereupon I offered to see the managers of the day and have the order changed, which I did, McKinley following Meeker as he desired. This writer was also one of the speakers, of which fact he was very proud under the circumstances. Since that date I have not been the guest of any labor organization, but their friendship for and fidelity to me have been manifested in business as well as in politics. At a later day, when Governor James Campbell of Ohio addressed a vast throng of workingmen at Good Ale Park, Columbus, I was honored by being on the program as one of the speakers. The governor, who was not only eloquent but also humorous on this occasion, said in the midst of his speech, referring to laboring men, that there was one position which he had always coveted but had never attained to. Then glancing at me, sitting near him, he exclaimed, "That position is porter on a Pullman car." Loud laughter greeted this essay of wit and humor. However, my opportunity finally came when, glancing at the governor, I said, "Gentlemen, I am more than surprised to hear that the governor of the great state of Ohio declare that he does now or never aspire to the position of porter on a Pullman car. Why, gentlemen, nearly 30 years ago I was a porter on a sleeping car which ran from Cleveland to Cincinnati, and I labored and studied to attain to a higher position. And here I am today sitting and speaking by the side of the governor of Ohio, the guest of a great labor organization of the state of Ohio." The effect of this retort can be better imagined than described, but from the noise the crowd made I imagined I had given him my Roland over his Oliver. Another bill which I drew when in the 69th General Assembly was one to exempt from garnishee process the wages due to a person who is the sole support of a widowed mother. It remains to this day in the statute books of Ohio, and is frequently invoked to protect poor widows from want. I ought to say, perhaps, that during the sessions of this 69th General Assembly I drew, introduced, and secured the passage of a bill which added $1,000 to the salaries of our underpaid common pleas judges. In addition to this, I led the fight for the addition of a fraction of a mill to our tax assessments, to create a fund which paid for the Soldiers' and Sailors' Monument on our public square. This I did in compliance with the wishes of the late Levi T. Schofield, Esquire, a grand, good, talented man, who was the architect and soul of the whole movement. And I also made special effort for legislation fathered by Councilman Curtis of Cleveland for the construction of our central viaduct. The foregoing, with a mass of routine legislation too numerous to mention, called for much energy and effort until the close of that session. Having now served 4 eventful sessions of the General Assembly, to the neglect of my professional business, I began to tire of it, for in very truth my only reason for neglecting my law office and spending my winters and springs in Columbus came from a desire on my part to blaze the way for others of my class, who I believed would follow me, and now that the road was open and clear, I was ready to retire to my private duties. Thereupon numerous of my friends of both races began to advise me to stand for the senatorial toga, which, I must confess, found in me a ready and willing listener, not more because the term senator was music in my ears, than for the reason that the fact of representing such a populous, wealthy, and intelligent constituency as inhabited the great city of Cleveland and her environs, the first city of the great state of Ohio, would be an additional honor which few men would decline. So I yielded, and thereforward was recognized as a candidate for senatorial honors. The convention in due time was called to order, and the contest for the place very hotly waged. At one time I considered that I had been defeated, and I went way back and sat down. The fact that the Honorable William H. Clifford, a colored man, was on the floor of the convention, distributing his tickets and soliciting support for the lower house, did not aid my cause in the least. For I was certain that, with only about 1 colored vote in 100, at that time the colored people would not be given a member in each branch of the Assembly, and then too those who were contesting my candidacy for the Senate pointed to the fact that the colored voters were not united, one faction demanding representation in the House, and another seeking a footing in the Senate. Finding the late Charles W. Snyder, Esquire, who for 5 consecutive years had a desk in my office, and on my certificate took his examination for the Ohio bar, came to me and said that if I would promise to support John Sherman's reelection to the United States Senate, he could secure for me the votes of 2 wards. I readily accepted the proposition because John Sherman was my choice in any event, and another ballot being taken, I was nominated by a safe plurality, amidst loud acclamation on the part of my friends. One of my most earnest and energetic supporters amongst the colored people was the Honorable Harry C. Smith, then and now editor of the Gazette, the militant and unswerving advocate of the rights of the colored Americans. At the general election I was duly elected by a plurality of several thousand votes, and for the first and only time thus far Ohio had elected a colored man senator, a fact which I could scarcely realize. I declared before being elected to the Senate that if elected I would never be a candidate for any other representative office. I have thus far kept my word and expect to in the future. End of chapter 9.